Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Want to go ahead and get to the topic of the day. And it's funny because if you listen to Wednesday night's Aaron Torres pod, we were recording live shortly after the conclusion of Big 12 Media Days. Big 12 Media Days in Vegas, Tuesday and Wednesday. And during the show, during the live chat, we actually had somebody ask, I think the name was Leslie of the person who asked. They said, Torres, you used to talk so much Colorado football. Always enjoyed your coverage of Coach Prime, Deion Sanders. We know who Coach Prime is, but of Coach Prime, of the Buffs. How come you haven't talked about them much of late? And so it's interesting, a couple things. One, the college hoops offseason kind of got haywire with all the coaching changes, recruiting, whatever. But also, as we were recording Wednesday night show live on YouTube, just didn't feel like there was that much that Coach Prime said that was all that interesting. Didn't feel like there was that much that was said by the Colorado contingent that got people fired up, which is kind of crazy because bluntly, I told producer Matt the day before, I said, we're going to wait till Colorado's done because I'm sure Coach Prime or one of the players that he brings to Big 12 Media Days is going to get the internet fired up. People are going to be mad and we'll talk about it. Well, it didn't happen while we were recording, but it was, of course, naturally right after we got off air that 2 or 3 quotes really started to surface. And boy, oh boy, did it get the internet mad. Got the internet mad, and all the same discourses that we heard at the end of last season, they came up again. Colorado's cocky. Colorado's overconfident. Colorado's arrogant. I can't stand them. Well, it's funny because I went back and listened to everything that got everybody riled up. I thought about some things, and I actually just kind of put some facts behind everything. And so there was a very viral Shedeur Sanders quote. There was a very viral Deion Sanders quote. And I want to talk about both because people on the internet were furious. And I got to be honest, I think both Coach Prime and I think Shedeur kind of were right in what they said. So let's get into it. Let's start with the Shedeur Sanders comment because Shedeur, when I tell you that Shedeur Sanders got America fired up, boy, oh boy, yeah, he got people mad at what he said. So Shedeur Sanders, Colorado Buffaloes quarterback, was kind of asked about the upcoming season already. Here's what he said. I already know the expectations and what comes with it. I know we are everybody's Super Bowl. I'm just trying to stay level-headed and grounded because I would never want to be that guy to look back and not be able to take advantage of the moment that we have right now. Now, that would be another and otherwise innocuous quote, except for that one little sentence. I know we are everybody's Super Bowl, and my goodness, did that get America fired up? Amongst the responses that I saw, Austin Elmore. I don't know that I've ever seen a more delusional group of people than anyone around the Colorado football program these days. House of Ute, who I can imagine, I could guess the fan base that he or she is part of. Crazy to think that Oregon, USC, Stanford, UCLA, Oregon State, Arizona, Wazoo, and Utah are all coming off Super Bowl victories. Very clever, House of Ute. Meistenberger says, dude, you were 4-8. Nobody actually cares about Colorado. Well, first of all, you can't say nobody cares about Colorado because literally they had several of the highest rated games of the entire season last year. Colorado State, never forget, there were 11 million people after midnight Eastern, around 2 a.m. Eastern, that were up watching that game. I think the peak was 11 million, and I think even at 2 a.m. there were like 8 million people watching. Oregon was one of the highest rated games of the season. Nebraska was one of the highest rated games of the season. So don't tell me that nobody cares. But what I would also say is Shedeur said that they're everybody's Super Bowl. And my question is it that crazy of a take? Because let's go back, let's put aside like all the anger that people have for Colorado, and let's just like look at some facts, okay? Because I seem to remember Dan Lanning, a coach that I like, I think is very good, and I have a ton of respect for, okay? I seem to remember him allowing cameras into the locker room before one game last season and one game only. It was Colorado. I happen to remember him saying, and I quote, "They're fighting for clicks, we're fighting for wins." I have no problem with that. That's perfectly fine as far as I'm concerned. But at the same time, what did I just say? I could be wrong. I could be dead wrong. But I watched Oregon play 14 football games last year. Some really high profile games. They played Washington on the road. They played Washington in the Pac-12 championship game. They played Liberty in the Fiesta Bowl. I don't remember Dan Lanning letting the cameras in the locker room before any other game. I think it was by design. I think it's because he knew he had a huge audience, and I think it was because that was a very big game in that moment for Oregon football. Now, you can argue as the season went on, as Colorado struggled, maybe it took on less significance, but in that moment, it felt pretty big. Was it their Super Bowl? I don't know, but I know that Dan Lanning and his team kind of acted a little bit differently for that one than they did every other game they played last year. So there's that. Beyond that, how about this? You forget this. Remember when they played at UCLA last year? Remember it was a Saturday night, and they were struggling at this point. But you know what was interesting about that game? As a guy who lives not far from the Rose Bowl, they put 71,000 butts in seats at the Rose Bowl in late October for the UCLA game. And you can sit there and say, oh, I'm a Tennessee fan. I'm a Georgia fan. We get 100,000 people every single week. Well, that's fine. But at the same time, UCLA doesn't. Again, I live by the Rose Bowl. I think, some of the narratives about UCLA's fan base are unfair, but I went back and looked it up just for fun. They got 43,000 in their season opener, which, by the way, was a made-up stat because it was hot as heck, and I'm pretty sure there was probably 10,000 people maybe in the stadium. They got 38,000 a couple weeks later for an FCS opponent. They got 56,000 for the biggest games that they played at home all year, except for Colorado. By the way, that's 56,000 announced attendance. Colorado, don't forget, had 71,000 people in the seats. They took tarps off of the Rose Bowl. It was, they've only, I looked this up before the segment to make sure I had this correct. It was only the third time since 2016. So we're talking about an 8-season stretch that they took those tarps off. So you can say that nobody cares about Colorado, that they're not the Super Bowl, but at UCLA, it seemed to be a pretty big game for them. By the way, Arizona State, a few weeks before, struggling program, ended up ironically being Arizona State's last game, Colorado's last win of the regular season. Arizona State sold out that game as well. Don't sell out very often there. Looked it up. Even when they played Oregon and Oregon was top 10 in the country, they didn't sell out. But guess what they did for Colorado? They sold out. Finally, I thought this was interesting. Do you remember when Matt Rule just a few days ago sat down with Joel Klatt? And I like Matt Rule. I don't know him personally, but I like him. And we were actually going to do a segment. That was the day that the technology in the Torres studio went haywire. But Matt Rule sat down for a long-form interview with Joel Klatt. I think he's great. I think he's going to be a star at Nebraska. I don't know if Nebraska can win national championships in this era, but I think he's going to elevate them as far as he can. Well, I bring it up because do you remember what he said about Colorado in that segment? Said a lot of things, but he said, you take Shedeur Sanders, you take Travis Hunter, all the players they have, and you take Coach Sanders, they're going to come into our place as a really good football team with dynamic players that you have to compete with. How good is it for that part of the country to have this game and have it on national TV at night? How good is it for the game of football? I don't just want football to become this area of the country or that area of the country. I want it to be coast to coast. I want all 50 states. What has Deion done? In my opinion, he's made football relevant to maybe people who weren't watching it. So I don't want to say that, Colorado was Nebraska's Super Bowl because Nebraska plays a lot of big games. Ohio State, they play this year. They go to USC. But this was kind of a big one, and Matt Rule acknowledged there were people watching. This is a big stage for us because there are people that will be watching this game that don't normally watch college football. So this idea that it was so absurd for Shedeur Sanders to say that they're everybody's Super Bowl, Literally, they sell out places where nobody else sells out. Matt Rule, who coached in the NFL, acknowledges people are watching my program when we play Colorado that won't watch us the rest of the year, that don't watch college football the rest of the year. What is so absurd about that comment? Let's take it a step further. Coach Prime said some things. Well, I said a lot of things. But one thing he said that caught everybody's attention, that had everybody triggered, here's what he said. He said, I'm judged on a different scale. My wins are totally different than your wins. Your wins, you just judge on football. That's why I started out talking about education and academics and so forth. I have to give you those things so you understand there's a greater scope. Now, I certainly don't think Coach Prime is the only coach that cares about academics or talks about academics or whatever. But let's go back to the beginning of the quote. I'm judged on a different scale. People were so fired up. My wins are totally different than your wins. Oh my goodness, how could Coach Prime say that? He's so arrogant, blah, 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 blah. I think he's kind of right, though. I think he's kind of right, because let's just do a little exercise. Again, you can like Torres, you can hate Torres, but let's go. One thing about Torres, I look at the facts. I use those facts to form my opinion. And so I just bring it up to very simply say, I'm going to give you some facts, and I want you to tell me how you would feel in this situation. Let's take a coach not named Deion Sanders, okay? Say he takes over the worst program in what was then Power 5 football. I know we don't have 5 power conferences anymore, but I think you get the point. Worst power conference program in America. Went 1-11 the year before. In year one, they improved their win total by 400%. Go from 1-11 to 4-8. I think you would say that's pretty good. But even in their losses, there is tangible improvement. Now, let's say this team doesn't win every game. There's a couple games where they do get blown out, because sometimes teams get blown out. But what if a team in one offseason went from 1-11 to 4-8, and then in their losses went from a 23-point loss to Arizona to just to losing by a walk-off field goal the next time they played them a year later under a different coach? Or they lost to Oregon State by 33 one year, brought in a new coach, and lose by 6 on the road. Or lost to USC by 33, and in the following year under a new coach, lose by a touchdown in a game where they had the ball late driving with a chance to tie it. Or maybe they play Utah one year, lose by 42. The next year they go on the road and lose by a touchdown. I think you would say that that is tangible improvement. As a matter of fact, I think if it was anyone other than Deion Sanders, anyone other than Coach Prime, you would actually say, wow, I'm not saying that guy is National Coach of the Year, but we should be talking about his improvement. Instead, what do I hear every time I talk about Coach Prime? And I know I'm going to hear it in the comment section. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast, etc. Comment section on YouTube is going to be, Torres, you love Coach Prime. Torres, Coach Prime is overrated. Torres, you are a stand for Coach Prime. No, I'm just using facts. And the facts back up what Coach Prime said, which is that he is judged differently than everybody else. And that a 4-8 season for him, he's somehow deemed to be overrated when his team went from 1 to 4 wins and was in a bunch of other close games. And so I could go on, but I want to get to some other stuff. I'm going to take a quick break in a minute. But at the same time, before we go on, I'm just stating the facts here. Now, I will say, I do think this is a very important year for Coach Prime. You know, Shedeur Sanders, love him, hate him, whatever. He's a very talented kid. And I know they're after Julian Lewis, one of the top quarterbacks in high school football. I know they got some more capable backups than a year ago. But you probably aren't going to have a quarterback this good going forward for Coach Prime. Defense should be improved. O-line should be improved. Skill position should be improved. And this is kind of the year where we all got caught up in it early, struggled late, and again, everybody says he's overrated. I don't think he's overrated, but I do think there's no doubt that the second half of the year wasn't as good, and there were some really dark moments. The Washington State loss specifically stands out. They got embarrassed. But I think this is an important year. Now, it will be interesting. By the way, one other quote that kind of didn't really make headlines, but Shiloh Sanders, Coach Prime's oldest son, or older son, I should say, oldest son on the team, did say some interesting things about the state of the locker room. He said, as a team, you've got to have a bond and can't have hate towards each other. You can't have poison. We got rid of the poison last year, and this year we're in a better space, clicking as a team, and we expect to win. So look, we'll continue the college football preview stuff over the next 6-7 weeks. I think this team is going to be improved. They're going to the Big 12. The schedule on paper is easier, and there's a chance for a big jump. Now, will it happen? It's up to them. But you go from 4 wins last year to an easier schedule this year, more talent. The skill positions are insane. We'll get into all this over the next probably 4, 5, 6 weeks. But I just bring it up because I do think there very much is a scenario where this team could be much improved, and now it's time for them to show it because I'm defending them now. I do think they are largely everybody's Super Bowl. I do think Coach Prime is largely judged by some stuff that other coaches aren't. But now, time to block out that noise and go have success on the field. Should mention, by the way, really quickly, if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget, we got our Coach Prime t-shirts at AaronTorresOnline.com. That's right, AaronTorresOnline.com. Make sure to check it out. But yeah, I am excited about this team. Make sure